of you were here this morning? No, that was a bad question. How many of you were not here this morning? Okay, a few of you. Well, welcome. I do work for Answers in Genesis, based in northern Kentucky, and there we built the Creation Museum and the Ark Encounter, and I want to just show you a very brief 1-minute video about that, if we're ready. So if you haven't been to the Creation Museum or the Ark Encounter, I encourage you to make some plans. Well, tonight we're talking about dinosaurs. Have you been, or have your children been, brainwashed? Dinosaurs are very popular in the culture today. We've got dinosaur toys, dinosaur books, quite a few dinosaur books, actually a very large number of dinosaur books, and those aren't all the dinosaur books. But all those books have two things in common. They're about dinosaurs, and they teach the children evolution in millions of years. And most parents don't know what to do with the evolution in millions of years, so they read the books to the kids, and the kids are learning about Triceratops and T-Rex and Brachiosaurus, and in the process, they're getting indoctrinated with evolutionary teaching. But it's not just the kids, the adults also. National Geographic, Dinosaurs Take Wing, the origin of birds. Most evolutionists believe that dinosaurs evolved into birds. That's how we got birds. In 1999, Feathers for T-Rex. We're going to look at that article in a moment. But wherever I've gone, as I've had the privilege of speaking in 30 countries, every country I go to, people ask the same question. Well, how do you fit dinosaurs into the Bible? And when they ask that question, what they're really asking is, how do you fit the fact that dinosaurs lived millions of years ago, and some of them were these vicious meat-eating creatures that ripped other creatures apart? How do you fit that into the Bible? And the answer is very easy. You don't. You don't fit the evolutionary teaching about dinosaurs into the Bible. Instead, we need to use the Bible to explain the dinosaurs. And I'm going to do that, but first I want to show you what the evolutionists say about dinosaurs. Here's a chart from Encyclopedia Britannica, which is not a Christian publication. And they show you that the dinosaurs first came into existence about 245 million years ago. The first ones were rather small. They eventually evolved into the bigger ones, and then the dinosaurs went extinct about 65 million years ago, they say. Here's another chart from that encyclopedia showing that they believe that all of the crocodiles and alligators and all the different kinds of dinosaurs are descended from a common ancestor, an archosaur, ancient lizard. And then they show you that the dinosaurs evolved into birds. In this particular case, they're saying that Archaeopteryx was a transitional form between reptiles and full birds. The demise of T-Rex and most other dinosaurs some 65 million years ago may grab all the headlines, one article reported recently, But paleontologists are equally concerned with puzzling out how these mighty beasts got their start. Who were their ancestors? In fact, I've observed in reading what evolutionists say about dinosaurs is they really don't spend very much time explaining how dinosaurs came into existence. They're all focused on what happened to them and how they changed into birds. A few years ago, I was speaking at Montana State University. I was speaking in Bozeman, Montana, and during a free afternoon, my hosts took me to Montana State University, where they have the Museum of the Rockies, and it's arguably one of the greatest dinosaur fossil collections in the United States. And so I walked through the museum, and I saw all these amazing fossils, and of course, under every fossil display, there was a sign that talked about millions of years. And as I was leaving the museum part to go back out into the lobby of the museum, I came to this television. And it was showing a short movie of birds taking off, landing, splashing in the water, preening their feathers. And there was a sign above the TV. You can barely see it there. I'm going to show you what it said. It says, "Birds are living dinosaurs." Well, I've got news for you, folks. Birds are birds. That's playing language game. But they want us to believe that birds are dinosaurs. In fact, some evolutionists say the dinosaurs never went extinct. They're in your backyard, sitting in the trees. Richard Lewontin is a leading evolutionist. He wrote an article with a chart comparing reptiles, a theropod dinosaur that supposedly evolved into birds. And he said this: evolution of birds from reptiles can be considered a process of adaptation by which birds solve the problem of flight. Now think about that sentence. If they already were birds, they already knew how to fly. And if they didn't know how to fly, they didn't figure it out. Because if it was that easy, Orville and Wilbur Wright wouldn't have had to do all those experiments. But they show you that the bones are different. Birds have largely hollow bones with that crisscrossing structure. Reptiles have marrow in their bones. The forelimbs are similar. They have the same bones, but they're significantly different. The forearms of that dinosaur are very short. The forearms of the bird are very long. Their sternums are similar, but they're noticeably different. And their skin covering is different. Reptiles have scales. Birds have feathers. Turtles and crocodiles have what are called scutes. They're hard, bony structures on the surface of their skin. And reptiles had the same kinds of structure. Now, to the naked eye, that's very, very different than a feather, obviously. But if you look carefully under the microscope, it gets more difficult to tell the difference. Here is a feather magnified several thousand times under the microscope. And we can crank up the power on the microscope, and it's really interesting. The feather is made up of a system of barbs and barbules, and that little structure right there swings over on that structure there with a hook. And so if you pull down a feather, it pulls it apart. If you go up the feather, it zips it together. Very complex structure and totally different from scutes on reptiles. Another difference between birds and reptiles is that reptiles have a two-way breathing system and they have a diaphragm. But birds have a totally unique breathing system. It's a one-way system and no diaphragm. So the air goes into the lungs. It doesn't go back out the same way. It goes out through some air sacs, some hollow bones, and then it goes back through the lungs. And this allows for a continuous flow of air, which enables the birds to have enough air and oxygen to breathe. Researchers at Oregon State University have made a fundamental new discovery about how birds breathe and have a lung capacity that allows for flight. And the finding means it's unlikely that birds descended from any known theropod dinosaurs. Well, To explain the origin of flight, evolutionists, and the origin of feathers, evolutionists have come up with several theories. One is we could call the ground-to-air theory. The idea here was that a reptile was up in a tree, and no, he wasn't up in a tree. This is the ground-to-air theory. He was trying to catch food, and he was running along, and his arms were kind of flabby, and they were flapping in the wind, and the scales, the scoots got frayed on the edges, and pretty soon he just took off. Of course, do you realize how long he would have to run? He would starve to death. So that idea has been discarded. The more popular view is the air-to-ground theory. Now here, the reptile's up in the tree, and he says to himself, you know, there's got to be a lot faster way to get from this branch on this tree over to that branch on that tree than going all the way down this tree, across the ground, and up the tree. And so he just jumped. And of course, the first experiment would have been a disaster. If he survived, he would have thought, you know, that was really stupid. I'm not doing that again. And if he didn't survive, his son would have said, Dad was really dumb. I'm not doing that. But either way, it's really a stretch of faith to believe that any process like that, no matter how many times you jump, are going to change scoots into feathers. Another theory for the origin of feathers is the keep warm theory. And the idea here is that reptiles evolved feathers to stay warm. We don't know what the first dino bird was. We're not being dogmatic here, but we're suggesting that it might have been something like a triceratops. But think about it. It's not going to keep that reptile warm if he only evolves feathers on one arm. He's got to evolve them everywhere on his body, or it's not going to do any good. Alan Fiducia is a world expert on birds at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. He's an expert. He's an evolutionist. He said, indeed, the simplest and most profound objection to all thermoregulatory theories, that's keep warm theory, is why feathers? Feathers are extremely complex, both structurally and embryologically. In other words, how they develop as the creature grows within the egg. Well, National Geographic published an article in November of 1999. Feathers for T-Rex? New bird-like fossils are missing links in dinosaur evolution. And look at that baby dinosaur, T-Rex. Do you see the down feathers? That's not a photograph. That's a painting by an evolutionist. You open up the article, they have a picture of this creature, and they say, we can now say that birds are theropods just as confidently as we say that humans are mammals. Well, what's a theropod? They don't show you that, so I'm going to show you. That's a theropod. It's the dinosaurs with the big back legs and the short front arms. And as soon as you see that picture that National Geographic doesn't show you, you see there's a problem. Because that dino bird in the picture has got very long arms, but the dinosaur has these short arms. Well, they said, we are just as confident that birds are theropods as we are that humans are mammals. Well, are humans mammals? Yes. We're in the mammal category. We're more than mammals because we're made in the image of God, but we're in the mammal category. We have hair, we give birth to live young, we feed our young milk. We're not in the reptile category, we're not in the bird category. They said, we're just as confident. Well, they said that in November of 1999. But in March of 2000, just a few months later, they published a little letter to the editor by a Chinese paleontologist who, in so many words, said, I hate to inform you of this, but the fossil on which you based that article was a fraud. It was the parts of a reptile fossil and the parts of a bird fossil very cleverly glued together by Chinese farmers. Well, National Geographic had egg on their face. They commissioned an independent investigator, and he published an article in October of 2000, just about 11 months after the original article, stuck in the back of the magazine with no color pictures, only a couple large font statements. I wonder how many people who read this article ever read that other article. Because most people are busy. They know pictures are worth 1,000 words, and National Geographic has really nice pictures. But it was a fraud. And the article in October is very interesting reading. Well, that was 2000. In 2003, Discover Magazine interviewed Dr. Alan Fiducia, the one who I just quoted about the keep warm theory. And they asked him, what about all the other evidence for feathered dinosaurs? Dr. Fiducia replied, when we see actual feathers preserved on specimens, we need to carefully determine if we are looking at secondarily flightless birds that have retained feathers and only superficially resemble dinosaurs, or if the specimens are in fact related to dinosaurs. That's a difficult issue to deal with right now, given the existence of fake fossils. Well, that raises a question. So far, only one feathered dinosaur, Archaeoraptor, that was the one in National Geographic, has been publicly acknowledged as a forgery. You think there are others? Dr. Fiducia, Archaeoraptor is just the tip of the iceberg. There are scores of fake fossils out there, and they have cast a dark shadow over the whole field. When you go to these fossil shows, it's difficult to tell which ones are faked and which ones are not. I have heard that there is a fake fossil factory in northeastern China, in Liaoning province, near the deposits where many of these recent alleged feathered dinosaurs were found. Now notice, this is not a taxi driver with an 8th grade education speaking. This is a world expert on birds. And he says when you go to these fossil shows, it's difficult to tell which ones are fake and which ones are real or authentic. Another paleontologist commenting on this same thing and referring to that fraud said, at the moment, I don't trust any of these specimens until I see the x-rays. The whole commercial market for fossils has gotten riddled with fakery. Well, that was 2000 and 2003 article that I quoted earlier. It went on to quote Fiducia. Journals like Nature, which is one of the leading technical journals published in Great Britain, they don't require specimens to be authenticated, and the specimens immediately end up back in China, so nobody can examine them. They may be miraculous discoveries, they may be missing links as they are claimed, but there's no way to authenticate any of this stuff unless you can spend a lot of money to fly to China, and then you have to be certain that the Chinese authorities will actually let you look at the fossils. Well, that was 2003. In 2005, the University of North Carolina News Service reported on Dr. Fiducia again, who said that the publication and promotion of feathered dinosaurs by the popular press and by prestigious journals and magazines, including National Geographic, Nature, published in England, Science, published in the United States, have made it difficult for opposing views to get a proper hearing. And he said, with the advent of the feathered dinosaurs, we are truly witnessing the beginnings of the meltdown of the field of paleontology. And yet, we still get reports out of China about feathered fossils proving that birds evolved from dinosaurs. But the problem of faked fossils in China is serious and growing, we're told in 2015. Rather than being excavated by paleontologists on fossil digs, most of the region's fossils are pulled from the ground by desperately poor farmers and then sold on to dealers and museums. And those farmers don't know how to properly, scientifically document where the fossils were found and what geological context. So we've got a problem. Storrs Olson is the curator of birds at the Smithsonian Institute in Washington, D.C. He wrote an open letter to National Geographic back in 2000, right after that National Geographic article appeared about that became known as the fraud, and he said, The idea of feathered dinosaurs and the theropod origin of birds is being actively promulgated by a cadre of zealous scientists acting in concert with certain editors at Nature and National Geographic, who themselves have become outspoken and highly biased proselytizers of the faith. What faith is he talking about? Not the Christian faith, the faith in evolution. Truth and careful scientific weighing of evidence have been among the first casualties in their program, which is now fast becoming one of the grander scientific hoaxes of our age, the paleontological equivalent of cold fusion. So, to change a reptile into a bird, you've got to do more than just change scales or scutes into feathers. You've got to change the breathing system, the skeletal system, the digestive and nervous system. You've got to construct bills and beaks, master the art of nest building. Now, we do know that dinosaurs laid eggs in nests. We have found clutches of eggs with baby dinosaurs in those eggs. But they didn't make nests in trees. That's an additional skill. You've got to learn to fly and navigate, and there are birds that spend the summer in Alaska, and when it starts to get cold, they eat enough food to build up their body weight, and they fly nonstop to Hawaii, losing about 60% of their body weight. Scientists don't know exactly how they navigate, perhaps by the sun, but on a cloudy day, that's going to be a little difficult. You've got to develop sound-producing organs and learn songs, and each bird species has a different song. And then you've got to shrink the dinosaur to make the first bird, and then you've got to shrink that first bird to make most of the other birds. Here's a chart, a diagram from an article by evolutionists showing the steady shrinkage over 50 million years. Now, if you believe that a process could steadily decrease in size, steadily over 50 million years, you have a lot of faith in the scientific community. I don't believe it for a minute. The idea that dinosaurs evolved into birds or any kind of reptile evolved into birds is really impossible. What has to happen to change a dinosaur into a bird? But they want us to believe that it happened. This is a chart from a book on dinosaurs published in association with the British Museum of Natural History. And they show you that the crocodiles, the birds, and the different kinds of dinosaurs are all descended from a common ancestor, an archosaur. And they have two colors of lines on that chart. What does that mean? Well, the yellow is the fossil evidence, the solid fossil evidence. The gray is not fossil evidence. So let's get rid of the gray so that we can see the evidence clearly. And that looks like crocodiles have always been crocodiles. Birds have always been birds. And different kinds of dinosaurs have always been different kinds of dinosaurs. Just like the Bible says in Genesis 1 that God created different kinds to reproduce after their kind. Well, you notice that we have crocodiles and birds today, but up at what they call the 65 million year mark, the dinosaurs all go extinct. What happened? Well, there have been a lot of different theories for the extinction of the dinosaurs. They ate too much. They didn't eat enough. But the dominant view today is the giant asteroid impact theory, that an asteroid slammed into the earth in what is now the Gulf of Mexico, and that sent a bunch of debris into the atmosphere, made the atmosphere toxic, caused tidal waves. But they don't really know that's what happened. And there are also others who say that it was massive volcanism, volcanic activity on a massive scale that caused the mass extinction. But Peter Makovitsky is the curator of dinosaurs at the Chicago Field Museum. He said this: the truth is, scientists don't really know what happened to the dinosaurs. Each hypothesis on its own doesn't fit the pattern very well. Was extinction gradual or sudden? The lack of data doesn't allow us to answer the question. And they still don't know the answer. In 2019, we read, the cause of the mass extinction of the dinosaurs and other creatures that marks the end of the Cretaceous and the beginning of the Paleogene is a scientific mystery. So they really don't know where dinosaurs came from, and they really don't know why they went extinct, and they certainly don't have solid scientific evidence that dinosaurs evolved into birds. So let's look and see what the Bible has to say about dinosaurs. And the first question we have to answer, of course, is when did God make the dinosaurs? And that's easy to answer. The Bible tells us they were made on the sixth day of creation. And you say, well, now wait a minute. I've read Genesis 1. It doesn't say anything about dinosaurs. Well, you're right. The word dinosaur doesn't appear there in Genesis 1. But the word dog and hippo and elephant also don't appear there. But I know God made dogs, hippos, and elephants on day 6 because the Bible says God made all the land animals on day 6. And since dinosaurs are land animals, he made them on day 6. God expects us to use our brain when we read the Bible. But I have photographic evidence anyway. Here's a rare photo of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. Hey, that picture is just as good as the evolutionists, except ours is based on eyewitness testimony by the Creator. Evolutionists is pure imagination. Well, how do we know what they looked like? Well, we don't really, because we rarely find fossilized skin. And when we do, it doesn't look the original color. They're now developing some techniques where they think they might be able to detect the pigment. They might have been dull green. They might have been nice colors like that. There are some wildly colored reptiles and amphibians in the world today. But we don't know for sure. Well, T-Rex had teeth up to 6 inches long with serrated edges like a nice steak knife. So what did he eat on the day he was created? Well, if we listen to the evolutionists, we would say anything he jolly well pleases. But we want to ask, let's think biblically, what did he eat on day 6 when he was created? Would he have been described as a plant eater, a meat eater, a scavenger eating dead things, or a plant and a meat eater, an omnivore? Well, if we're thinking biblically, we have to say he was originally a plant eater. Because in Genesis 1, on the 6th day, God said to Adam and Eve that he gave them all the plants and the fruit of the plants for food, and to every beast he also gave the green plant for food. And so the original creatures were vegetarian. And there are lots of plant material, fruits and vegetables, where sharp teeth would be very useful. In fact, it's difficult to cut a tomato with a dull knife, but those sharp teeth could have been used to eat lots of plant material. But then people object. Yes, but sharp teeth are proof that the creature ate meat. No, sharp teeth are just proof that the creature had sharp teeth. Recent research has shown that 3/4 of crocodilian species eat fruit frequently and intentionally. And you can go on YouTube and watch an alligator eat a watermelon. Or here you have 6 jaws of 6 different species of bats. One of those jaws goes with a bat that eats only blood. One eats fish, one eats only fruit, one eats insects. One of those jaws goes with a bat that eats nectar and pollen, but only one of those jaws goes with a bat that eats small mammals. Now, which jaws go with that bat? Well, if we never saw those creatures alive, if all we had were fossil jaws, we'd probably think they all ate meat. But it's only B. Here you have 2 jaws that are remarkably similar. They have sharp canines and good molars for chewing. But the top one is a fruit bat that eats only fruit. The bottom one is a wolf that eats only meat. Here's the skull and claws of a squirrel. Squirrels have sharp teeth and sharp claws, but they're almost strictly vegetarian. Here's an interesting sign from a zoo in Sydney, Australia. All bears although all bears have teeth designed for eating meat, their diet consists mainly of plants. But now think about that. If their diet consists mainly of plants, why don't we say they have teeth designed to eat plants? That's what they eat. And there's one bear that has sharp teeth and sharp claws, and he's strictly vegetarian. That's the panda bear. And he needs those sharp teeth and claws to eat that tough bamboo. Did you hear about the lioness that refused to eat meat? Back in the 1950s, a couple from the state of Washington were at a zoo. They saw that a mother lion was kind of beating up on its baby cub, and in a fast action, they reached in and pulled that baby cub out. They asked for permission to take it home and nurse it back to health. The zoo gave them that baby. They called it Little Tyke. They raised that cat to full maturity. They put meat in the milk bowl. It drank the milk and left the meat. They wrapped meat in vegetable material. It ate the vegetables and left the meat. It lived its whole life and never ate meat. And its favorite animal at their farm was Becky the lamb. That reminds me of Isaiah, where Isaiah says in the future there'll be a time when the wolf will lie down with the lamb and a lion will eat grass like an ox. So on day 6, man and the animals were vegetarian. Well, if dinosaurs really lived with people, why don't we find the word dinosaur in the Bible? Well, that's easy to explain. The reason it's not in the King James Bible is because it was translated in 1611. But the word dinosaur was not invented until 1841 by Sir Richard Owen, a famous British scientist. So that's 230 years after the word was invented, after the Bible was translated. Well, why isn't the word dinosaur in our modern translations? Well, that's because our modern translations have been done by modern Bible scholars who have all been more or less influenced by evolutionary or at least millions of years thinking. But there is a Hebrew word in the Old Testament, tanin, and it has been translated many times in different Bibles with the word dragon, particularly in the King James Bible. And there's some interesting statements. In Isaiah 27, in that day the Lord will punish Leviathan, the fleeing serpent, with his fierce and great and mighty sword, even Leviathan, the twisted serpent, and he will kill the dragon, that's the Hebrew word tanin, who lives in the sea. Wonder what kind of creature he was referring to. Maybe it was a plesiosaur. Now, the Bible's not a science textbook. It's not about biology. It's about man and man's relationship with God. But there are a few statements here and there about animals in the Bible. And the Bible doesn't classify creatures the same way modern science does. So dinosaurs are technically, by modern definition, they are land animals. So technically, a plesiosaur is not a dinosaur. It's just a swimming reptile. But then there's an interesting passage in Job chapter 40. You know, Job suffered the loss of his children, the loss of his livestock, the loss of his health, and for 37 chapters he was trying to figure out, with his friends' unhelpful help, why he was suffering all these things and couldn't figure it out. And God listened to all of this dialogue, and then in chapter 38, God talks to Job, and he said, okay, Job, if you're so smart, I'm going to ask you some questions. And he asks him, where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? And then he starts talking about different animals. And he talks about the horse, the lion, the eagle, the deer, the mountain goat, the donkey, the ox, ostrich, and locust. And in each case, God asks a question, and he asks a question in such a way that he often says, now look at this. Look at that. And he asked some questions about those creatures. And so it's clear Job was looking at these creatures. He knew these creatures. And we come to Job chapter 40, and he says, now look at Behemoth, which I made along with you, and which feeds on grass like an ox. His strength he has in his loins, what power in the muscles of his belly. So this evidently is a creature that he saw. It was a creature that was vegetarian. It had really strong stomach muscles and leg muscles. And then in verse 18 we read, his bones are tubes of bronze, his limbs are like rods of iron. He ranks first among the works of God. So he had really powerful bones, and he evidently was the greatest land creature that God made. Chapter 41 goes on where God talks about and asks questions about Leviathan, who evidently was the greatest sea creature. But here he's talking about a land animal. What animal is he talking about? Well, I left out one verse. That's verse 17 that says, his tail sways like a cedar. Now, if you use a study Bible, you will look in the margin of your study Bible, and most of them will say something like the NIV study Bible, possibly the hippopotamus or the elephant. Whoever wrote that note has not been to the zoo very often or was not thinking very clearly about a cedar, because this is the cedar of Lebanon, one of the biggest trees in the Middle East. And when that tree moves in a strong wind, it doesn't go like that. It's going to move really slowly. Now, here's a tail that would move like a cedar tree. Now, kids, you have to help your parents. They won't know the answer to this question. But have you ever seen an elephant with a tail like that? Or a hippo with a tail like that? No. But there are creatures that had tails like that. They're called sauropods, the dinosaurs with a really long neck and long tail. And just in case you haven't been to the zoo lately, that is an elephant tail. And when it moves, it goes like that. And that is a hippo tail. And when it moves, it goes like that. And if you see it moving like that, you would be very wise to stand some distance away, because there will be other things moving from that same location, and it won't be pretty. So, on day 6, we have elephants, we have hippos, we have dinosaurs, we still have hippos and elephants. What happened to the dinosaurs? Well, we go back to Genesis, and we learn that God created Adam in a perfect world where there was no death and disease and suffering. Creatures weren't ripping other creatures apart. Man sinned, and that brought the judgment of God on the whole creation. But evolution rejects not only what God says about creation, evolutionists reject what God says about death. And they say there's always been death. Creatures have always been ripping other creatures apart. But Genesis 3 says the first creature that God judged was the serpent, and he cursed the serpent more than or above all cattle and every beast of the field. And so God cursed the creation, and we now live in a creation that is groaning and suffering in bondage to corruption. And we don't know if it happened instantly at the curse or gradually, but some animals began to be carnivores, to eat other animals. And animals began to have disease, just like humans have disease. And the world became very, very evil, so evil that God said in Genesis 6 that the thoughts and intentions of the human heart were only evil continually. And so God said, I'm going to destroy the world. And Noah, I want you to build an ark, and I want you to take 2 of every kind of land animal and bird unto the ark. 2 of every kind, not 2 of every species, 2 of every kind. And modern creationist research, we've concluded that the original created kind was not at the level of species in modern classification, or even in most cases at the level of genus, but at the level of family. And he didn't take sea creatures on the ark, he just took land animals and birds. And as soon as we talk about dinosaurs being on the ark, people scoff. Non-Christians scoff. Sadly, some Christians scoff. And they say, well, there's no way you could fit all the animals on that ark. You certainly couldn't get a dinosaur in there. Well, you couldn't get that dinosaur into that ark, but that wasn't the ark. And the Bible gives us the dimensions, and so we've built our ark according to the biblical dimensions. And it was a huge boat with 3 decks. and a volume capacity of about 450 18-wheeler trucks. Yeah, but you still couldn't fit the dinosaurs in there. Well, we need to know some facts about dinosaurs. First fact is, not all the dinosaurs were large. Some dinosaurs were no bigger than a chicken at full maturity. Second thing we need to know is that all the big dinosaurs were once small. Dinosaurs are reptiles. Reptiles never stop growing. So here you have a little itty-bitty alligator coming out of the egg. You can stick your finger in the mouth of that little alligator and it'll just tickle your finger. But that little guy is going to grow up. You don't want to stick anything in that mouth. The largest dinosaur eggs we've ever found are only a little bit bigger than an American football. So the great T-Rex, the Apatosaurus, the Ceratops, they were all small once. And then scientists have studied the growth pattern in those big dinosaurs, the sauropods, and they found that they didn't grow very much the first few years of their life. Most of their growth was in a short period, and they didn't grow very much after that. So if Noah took the animals on the ark when they were young, they would be small. And then they wouldn't grow very much in that 1 year on the ark. Most of their growth would be after they came off the ark. But then people object, yes, but now you're trying to make it easy for Noah. No, think about it. Why did God tell Noah to take animals onto the ark? And let's note, the Bible clearly says in Genesis 7 that Noah and his family went into the ark and God brought the animals to the ark. Why? To keep offspring alive on the face of all the earth after the flood. God is not going to bring the big T-Rex, the big Potosaurus to the ark, because that's going to be Grandma and Grandpa. They won't have any reproductive potential after the flood. He's going to bring junior T-Rex, junior Apatosaurus, and they'll be small. There's another fact we need to know. Evolutionists have multiplied the number of genre and species of dinosaurs. Almost every new discovery gets a new species name. A few years ago, some leading evolutionary experts on dinosaurs wrote an article in which they said approximately a third of all dinosaur species never existed. Why? Well, they said there's two reasons. One is, when they find dinosaur bones, they don't usually find the whole skeleton. They just find some bone fragments. So if a scientist in China finds a few bones, he gives it a scientific name, and then a scientist over in North America finds some bones, he gives it a different scientific name, and then years later, after they've already got established names, they find more bones of the same creature, and they find, oh, that's the same creature, but they've already got different names. And then the other reason these two evolutionists said that many species never existed is that they've learned over the years that as a dinosaur grows, just like mammals and people, their morphology changes. The shape of their skull, the frill, like on a triceratops, changes. And so they've been given often different scientific names, species names, for what really is junior, teenager, and grandpa. Here's an example. Here are two skulls that are remarkably similar. The scientific name, the first one is the genus, the second is the species. These are not only different species, they say, they're different genus. But there is less difference between those skulls than there is between those dog skulls. And those dogs are all the same species, Canis lupus. So Noah didn't have to take two of every one of those ceratops onto the ark. He just took two ceratops. And in the genetic code of those ceratops was all the information to produce that variety, or some of that variety may be the result of different stages of growth, or some of that variety may be the result of mutations. He didn't take two of every one of those ceratops on the ark, just like he didn't take two of every one of those dogs on the ark. He just took two dogs. We know he didn't take any of those dogs on the ark because they're all the result of artificial breeding by humans over the last 300 to 400 years. And so, as creationists have studied the evidence We think there were only about 50 or 80 kinds of dinosaurs on the ark. Some of them were small at full maturity. All of them were small when they were young. There was plenty of room in the ark for them and the other creatures. And anything not in the ark died. As the floodwaters came onto the earth, creatures which could run to higher ground would, but eventually there wouldn't be any higher ground. They would be swept away by the floodwaters. And so we would expect to find from that flood billions of dead things buried in rock layers, laid down by water all over the earth. And that's what we find. We find dinosaur fossils on every continent. And we find occasionally fossilized dinosaur skin, which right away tells you that had to be fossilized quickly. I don't know if you have this here in Virginia, but over in Kentucky, we have deer hunting all year round. And there's a couple weeks a year where you can hunt with a bow or a gun, and then the rest of the year, Kentucky residents hunt with their car. And I've noticed something interesting. When they kill the deer with a bow or a gun, they take it home and process it. When they kill the deer with the car, they leave it on the side of the road. And you know what happens? After a few weeks, if the highway department doesn't come to pick it up, that deer gets fossilized. So we've got fossilized deer along the highways of Kentucky. No, don't believe that. I'm just playing with you. No, if the highway doesn't come to pick it up, nature will take care of it. Creatures will come and eat that. Buzzards, turkey vultures will come and chip away. The other elements of the environment will eventually destroy all the evidence. To make a fossil, you've got to bury that creature rapidly. We find fossilized dinosaur footprints. You go on the beach, on the Atlantic Ocean, you walk on the sandy beach, your footprints are not going to stay there very long. The ocean's going to erase them. We find, not uncommonly, dinosaurs like this with their head thrown back, and dinosaurs interpret that as death in the throes of water. Well, if dinosaurs and people live together, why don't we find dinosaurs and people in the fossil record together? We're told that there are no human fossils in the rock layers where the dinosaurs are. Why, if they live together? Well, for starters, I wouldn't expect human beings to be running next to a dinosaur trying to escape the floodwaters. But second, we live in America with bears, but there are no bears in Cincinnati except in the Cincinnati Zoo. So if all of Cincinnati was flooded and we had fossils, we wouldn't find any bears with all the millions of people in Cincinnati buried in sediments. Well, we don't have dinosaurs living today, we're told. So if the dinosaurs went extinct 65 million years ago, and there are no fossils of dinosaurs in those rock layers between 0 and 65 million, and there's no humans, well, that's proof positive that humans and dinosaurs never lived together. The absence of evidence is evidence of absence. No, it's not. A number of years ago, they found a fossil called the coelacanth. It was a fish. They said it went extinct 65 million years ago. Because as they came up through the rock layers, when they got to what they call the 65 million year mark, not only did the dinosaurs disappear, but the coelacanth disappeared from the fossil record. So they said, that's proof that the creature went extinct. They said that until 1938, when they found the coelacanth swimming off the coast of Madagascar in 400 feet of water. And when they compared the living coelacanth with the fossil, it was virtually identical. Now, we have coelacanths and humans on the earth today, but you don't find coelacanths and humans buried together in the fossil record. Why? Well, because human beings don't live at 400 feet below sea level, so we wouldn't expect to see them together. But they were pretty dogmatic that for 65 million years of deposition of geological material, there were no coelacanths. But recently they had to modify that because they found one in a rock layer that they didn't think was there before. Well, why did they become extinct if they did? A few years ago, we called the Cincinnati Zoo. They have an endangered species program, and we asked them, well, why do creatures go extinct? And they said, well, man overhunts them, man destroys their habitat, man brings disease into their population, and maybe rapid climate change in the world. Well, why couldn't it be the same reason for the dinosaurs? They didn't know why the dinosaurs went extinct, but why couldn't it be the same reasons? But they might not be extinct. Remember the coelacanth that they said was extinct, and then they found it alive? They could be living in some of the deep jungles of Brazil, of Central Africa, Papua New Guinea. In fact, there are some tantalizing testimonies of natives who live near those deep jungles who've reported seeing creatures that when they describe them to a Westerner, it sounds like they've seen a dinosaur. But of course, that's just anecdotal, and we can't take a photograph of them even if we saw one, because you can fake anything on a photo on the computer, so nobody would believe that. If they still exist, we've got to capture one, and if it's too big to fit on the airplane, we've got to go ahead and cut off the leg, put it on ice, and send it to Oxford University and say, would you please identify this? And if it's a dinosaur, they're going to have to rethink their theory real fast. Won't be a surprise for creationists. Well, when did they become extinct, if they did? There's some very strong evidence that it wasn't very long ago. In 1993, Mary Schweitzer was a graduate student at Montana State University, and she was in the lab with her lab assistant, and they were looking at a slice of T-Rex bone under the microscope, and the lab technician couldn't believe what she saw. And Mary went over and looked, and she said, it was exactly like looking at a slice of modern bone. But of course, I couldn't believe it. I said to the lab technician, the bones, after all, are 65 million years. How could blood cells survive that long? She saw evidence of blood cells in that bone. Why couldn't she believe it? Because she's locked into the millions of years. She can't possibly question that, or it would be the end of her scientific career. Well, she published her research on this. Many evolutionists criticized. They said, oh, it's contamination from the modern environment. You misinterpreted. You didn't see it clearly. Well, that was 1993, but in 2005, after she got her PhD, she got some more opportunities, and she's finding more soft tissue. And here's a little Discovery Channel TV clip where she talks about it.
Not going to believe this. When she picked up a small piece to stop the reaction by putting it in water, it stretched and it sproinged and it moved all over the place. So we knew we had something pretty unusual.
It appears to be soft tissue. When they look at neighboring parts of the bone, they're even more surprised.
Out popped the blood vessels, and they were pretty incredible. And I said, I don't believe it, that's not possible. We need to do it again and again. It's one of those just goosebump-inducing scientific moments, that's all I can say. And they don't really happen very often.
Blood vessels should not exist in fossilized bone. Many scientists believe organic molecules can't last more than 100,000 years. Yet Schweitzer's bone is 68 million years old.
I think the presence of soft tissues and cells indicates there's a process going on that we didn't have a clue about. So I think it means that we have to kind of rethink the whole chemical process of making a bone turn into a fossil.
What about rethinking the whole dating process of how they come up with the date, 68 million years? They didn't date that fossil with radiometric dating. They dated the rock layer. Well, how did they do that? Well, we don't have time to go into that right now, but she keeps finding soft tissue here in 2015, tiny delicate vessels that carried blood through a duck-billed dinosaur 80 million years ago, never fossilized, and still contain the beast's tissue, a new study finds. Well, I think we have this video. If we don't have it outside on the tables, it's up it's on our website. You can order it there. But Echoes of the Jurassic. The Creation Research Society has been doing research, their own research. They found their own dinosaur bones in Wyoming, and they have found soft tissue. And in this video, they talk about that, and they critique the evolutionists like Mary Schweitzer are trying to come up with some kind of explanation for how these bones have soft tissue, which should have all disintegrated in 100,000 years maximum, and yet it's in these bones that supposedly are millions of years old. And so in 2015, the Creation Research Society devoted their technical journal, one whole issue, to their research project, iDino, which stands for Investigation of Dinosaur Intact Natural Osteotissue, bone tissue. And they have found some amazing things as they have studied with electron microscopes. Those little objects in there are 20 microns, which is close to the smallest size of the thinnest human hair. These are little tiny structures, and look at the detail that is still preserved. DNA breaks down very rapidly. It's got, estimate 650,000 years maximum before it would all be ruined. Collagen also has a maximum that it could survive in natural environments, just under 1 million years, and yet they have found DNA in amber, creatures in amber, and collagen in several different dinosaurs that are supposedly millions of years old, but they can't possibly be that old because that collagen and that DNA should have all been destroyed. Creationists have also used carbon-14 to date unfossilized dinosaur bones. There shouldn't be any carbon-14 in those bones because the maximum you could date anything with carbon-14 is about 100,000 years. And yet these bones that are supposedly millions of years old have measurable carbon-14 in them. There's more evidence that dinosaurs didn't go extinct very long ago, if they are in fact extinct. Almost every culture in the world has dragon legends. The Chinese are the most famous, of course, but many other cultures have them. The flag of Wales has a dragon on it. And there is a petroglyph carving on stone in Natural Bridges National Monument in the southwest United States that bears striking resemblance to a dinosaur, specifically a brontosaurus with a long tail and neck and small head and all. And here it is, carved on stone, and here's a man bringing out the relief. Now, these are supposedly, and there are other creatures carved on stone there, supposedly done by Native American Indians a couple thousand years ago. How in the world did they make that picture if they had never seen the creature? We don't have any creatures that look like that. And then there's the church, the Carlisle Cathedral in Carlisle, England. Very famous church, and in the floor of the cathedral, there's a tomb to Bishop Bell, who died in 1496. And around the lid on the floor is a brass band on that lid, and it's got carvings of creatures in it. It's got a carving of a bird and a fish and a dog and what looks like 2 long-necked dinosaurs. How in the world did the artist in 1496 carve that if he'd never seen the creature? So there you have the picture from the tomb in Carlisle Cathedral, but we also find similar long-necked creatures with long tails in this stone from Egypt, 3,000 years before Christ, estimated by Egyptian dating methods. And this one in a Mesopotamian seal. Those look like dinosaurs. How did those artists make those pictures if they had never seen the creature? And then there is the temple in Cambodia, a very famous temple deep in the jungles. And carved into the stone entrance of one of the entrances are a number of different animals, very recognizable, including a stegosaurus. How did the artists carve that back in the 12th century, 700 years ago, if they'd never seen the creature. The first dinosaur bones that were really understandable as dinosaurs were not discovered until the early 19th century, and initially people didn't know exactly what they were. You can't just make a drawing like that from a few bones. And then we have living fossils. These are fossils, these are creatures that have supposedly gone extinct, and then we find them alive. And in this case, the Wallamai pine went extinct, they said, 150 million years ago. They said that until it was found alive in a secluded valley about 100 miles from where they found the fossils in 1994. And in an exhibit in a museum, they have a replica of this tree. They're protecting, they don't want to tell people where that secluded valley is because they want to protect these living fossils, creatures that haven't changed in millions of years. And at the bottom of this replica, they say, the discovery of the Wallamai pine is the equivalent of finding a small dinosaur still alive on the earth. Well, I ask a question. Why wouldn't it be equivalent to finding a really large dinosaur still alive on the earth? Could be there. Those deep jungles of Brazil and Africa, Papua New Guinea, where nobody lives, they could be doing just fine there. Well, we live in a culture where an awful lot of people, in a world where a lot of people say the Bible can't be trusted in this scientific age. Why do they say that? Well, it's because we have cell phones and automobiles and refrigerators. No, that's not why people say that. It's because they say evolution and ape men and the Big Bang and millions of years is all proven scientific fact. There never was a global flood. The Bible's not history. And one of the main tools that the evolutionists use to convince the public of this is dinosaurs, through dinosaur books, through movies like Lost World, Jurassic Park, through the natural history museums. And the world wants to know what the church is going to do about this. And most of the church has ignored this issue. Some Christians have said, well, dinosaurs never existed. They're actually a creation of the evolutionists to deceive the world. No, the dinosaurs really existed. That's not a good answer. And then others say, well, don't worry about the dinosaurs. Just trust in Jesus. But if you can't trust this book, you can't trust in Jesus. And so kids need answers. Parents need answers. And so we've got answers on our website and in resources that we've got there on the back table. The answers books that answer 130 most asked questions. The first one has an article or a chapter on dinosaurs. And we've got a book on the flood to understand that it's very believable that there was a flood, a global catastrophic flood, and we can have answers regarding Noah's Ark. And then we have a book called The Lie to explain why this issue is so important and why we can't, as Christians, compromise with evolution in millions of years. And The Gospel Reset, explaining that evolution is the biggest challenge to the gospel today, to the believability of the gospel in the minds of many people. So those core resources. And then we've got answers books for kids, and the second volume deals with dinosaurs and the flood. We've got a DVD on dinosaurs for little kids, and for preschoolers, a book teaching them the alphabet and about dinosaurs. And then we've got a book for kids of all ages, teaching about dinosaurs, a book on dragon legends and how that relates to dinosaurs, and a DVD on the flood and the fossils. And so encourage you to look at those resources, and then consider getting the Answers magazine, which is a magazine to teach the biblical worldview. You know, there are a lot of Christian leaders, particularly apologists, defenders of the faith in the church today, who are talking about we need to defend the Christian worldview. But watch their language. The Christian worldview, that's not adequate. We've got to defend the biblical worldview. And many of our apologists who are defending the Christian worldview have accepted the millions of years and they're not defending the biblical view of a global flood, of an original very good creation, and of a fall that impacted the whole creation. So this magazine will help you to think biblically and help your children think biblically. And you can sign up for that in the book table there. And then our free newsletter, which comes 12 times a year, encourage you to sign up for that. It's free, and it will help you to keep abreast of what's happening in our culture and other resources that will help you and things that are happening at the Creation Museum and the Ark. And if you come to the museum, you'll see that we have about 60 life-size dinosaurs. We have dinosaur fossils, including our Ebenezer, the Allosaur fossil. And then at the Ark, we've got some dinosaurs in some of the cages. And so we like to use dinosaurs as our missionary lizards. They help us to explain the gospel. The reason that we know about dinosaurs is because we find their fossils. And what are fossils? Dead things. Why is there death? Sin. What has God done about sin? He sent his Son, the Lord Jesus Christ, to pay the penalty for sin. And so we can use the Bible to explain the dinosaurs. They were made on the sixth day with man. They lived thousands of years ago, not millions and billions of years ago. They were all originally vegetarian. There was no death before the fall, and the fossils are the result of Noah's flood. So we need to use the Bible in every area of our thinking, not just about sin and salvation and morality, but the history in the Bible is critical. And what God says about the original creation and the fall and the flood is in the Bible for a reason. It's part of building a biblical worldview. And the evolutionary view, the millions of years idea, the dinosaurs evolving into birds idea, these are assaults on the biblical worldview. And we need to have answers, and we have answers, and we need to get equipped with them. So we're going to take a break now, and then we'll come back at 6 o'clock and consider, where did this millions of years idea come from anyway? A critically important question with critically important answers. Let's take a break.